This video will be made to talk about the content that was cut from Earthworm Jim 3D. The previous video that I made a year ago is now considered outdated, and this one will be made to add new info and also help out the lost media search. With all that out of the way, let's talk about the game's cut content, betas, speculation, and rumors. The game was announced in spring of 1997, and the early name of it was Earthworm Jim 3 with the addition of Earthworm Jim 64. The plot followed Earthworm Jim liberating penguins at a zoo and stopping terrorists, but he ends up getting knocked out and goes unconscious, going into a dream-like state. He ends up waking up on an island that's made of various parts of Jim's brain, and he must find a control system in order to wake himself up and stop terrorists from using a nuclear device. Yep, you heard me, that was the original plot for the game. The level count is unknown, but as of now, there would have been a total of 9 different parts of Jim's brain that you would have explored. Those being childhood, which would have had a level that had Earthworm Jim going to school, passing exams, and meeting his mother. Aggression, which would have taken place on a battlefield at an army assault course. Athleticism would have had a level that had Earthworm Jim going through a sport gauntlet, like a 100-mile sprint, ski shooting with a rocket launcher, girl hurling, which basically would have been javelin but with girls, and would have had a bowling place called Bob's Bowling that would have had Bob the Killer Goldfish located there. Aspiration, which is currently unknown. Dream, which would have had a level that took place in the sky on clouds. Fear, which would have had a cavern with grass, mushrooms, and purple lighting. Fetish, it's unknown what levels would have been in this stage. Greed, it's unknown what levels would have been in this stage. Lust, which would have had a level that took place in a shower of a cheap hotel. And the last area, which is violence, and it's unknown what this stage was meant to have for levels. There was going to be subsections of levels that had Earthworm Jim ride his pocket rocket. Some levels would have had Jim finding and locating some characters in order to help them, ranging from both friends and foes. Earthworm Jim would have been able to swing across items and platforms, just like in the original game. Earthworm Jim's model had a 2D but 3D look and design, despite the game being a 3D platformer. Originally, pork boarding was a ski level that was planned to be known as salami boarding, and the theme for it is known as Ski Jim. It was found in the files of the PC version of the game. Pink cell-shaped icons would have been the main collectibles, and there was going to be a brain meter. For levels, I guess I'll go over and explain some of them. There was a house level that was planned and could have possibly been used to test various things as it's seen in footage and screenshots. One that resembles an early version of the memory stage in the final game, and the physical stage, more on that later. Here's a few more screenshots. Some characters like Psycho, Professor Monkey for a head, Bob's Killer Goldfish, and Number 4, and the Bond v Special Elite were also in this version of the game, with the addition of Evil the Cat and the Disco Zombies, or as they were known as Zombie Elvis, who potentially would have been a boss fight in the game in order to ally them into your group. A Scarecrow with a rocket launcher for an arm, a lobster named Claw Calp-Aldi, who was described to be similar to Marlon Brando, which I'm pretty sure they're referring to his role in The Godfather. And finally, Rabbit, who's described to be a maniac scooter-riding rabbit who acts like Norman Bates, who is the main slasher in the 1960 slasher horror movie Psycho. The concept art does exist of this character, and he would have been in the game as seen in this screenshot. Confusingly enough, there was a total of 5 levels that were planned for the final game, according to this magazine page, and it was planned for a release date of January 1998, and according to this magazine, it was apparently 10% complete around this time. The plot for this version of the game was almost similar to the final game except for some differences, those being that the intro was to have Earthworm Jim in an action film that would have been a parody of James Bond 007 before he got crushed by a cow. And this intro may or may not have been actually animated, since magazines mention some details that are very similar to the footage of Earthworm Jim 3D's announcement, meaning the game could have FMV cutscenes. the game would have had a total of 6 worlds and 30 to 32 levels. The hub is different from the final game. There's a tank that has a pig and green liquid, and there's some platforms for each of the different worlds, and when standing on it, a tube would lower down and sort of fill it with green liquid before sucking Jim into it. It would play a cutscene of Jim's eyes in the dark as we hear him bump into multiple walls, where in the final game, it's just a large screen with Peter Puppy. And there are 4 different color rooms of platforms, and when Jim's on it, he would play the golden udder like an accordion, causing the platform to lower down. The first world of the game would have been Physical. The plot of Physical would have been about Earthworm Jim battling 2 goddesses named Slobexless and Domesity, who were the goddesses of the kitchen surfaces. Physical would have also been called Heroism and had household chores and Greek themes. The hub level of this stage would have had a store that looked just like the Temple of Hari with sale signs, and it would be used as an entrance for one of the levels. During the Pocket Rocket segment of one of the levels, there would have been a shopping cart icon that would have been used for the same amount of items to collect. That possibly explains why there are rings that are made out of apples, oranges, and fish. This stage was cut from the game. Fear's plot would have followed Earthworm Jim watching too many horror movies, and the stage would have had horror movie cliches and tropes. Evil the Cat was meant to be the main boss of this stage, and in the final game, he's replaced by Professor Monkey for a head. And there's also the addition of the Spampires, which were meant to appear in this stage according to the screenshots and footage. And speaking of screenshots, there's this one of a Dieter-like stage, which could have possibly served as an entrance for a level. And also there's a giant Evil the Cat on it. Happiness looked vaguely different from how it is in the final game, and the plot of it would have been about Earthworm Jim trying to save the ultimate burger recipe from Fatty Roswell and his evil burger chain who wants to steal it. Aggression would have been about Earthworm Jim getting tossed into a cold war between cows, chickens, and pigs, and he must stop it. This stage was reworked into the memory stage that appears in the final game. Fantasy would have had a similar plot to how it is in the final game about Earthworm Jim being a sheriff and defending a town from a bunch of evil grannies. And finally, Childhood. This stage would have been a fairground at a pier, and Jim must prevent a nuclear reactor from being built on it. There also would have been a section based off of Bob's bowling area that was meant to be in the 1997 version of the game. And when inside of it, Jim would have fought against Bob the Killer Goldfish and his cats. According to some unused code of the PC port of the game, there are some remains of the dialogue for the stage. The dialogue hints that there was going to be a mission that involved Earthworm Jim helping a mother not only find their wig, but also their 2 children who would have been heavily affected and exposed by radiation, and also one of them would have mutated and grew a hand out of their head. Once found, they would be rewarded with a golden udder. Pork boarding was just a mini game where you would have had to get to point A to point B while trying to beat your record. The Pocket Rocket was meant to be used for racing segments, and while similar to pork boarding, the segments were going to have a fuel system in the minigame, and the player would have had to beat their score. The marble system was different. Originally they were yellow brain cells that Jim would have to collect, and unlike the final game, there was meant to be a small amount of them. And in the final game, they were changed to being marbles, and the total amount you would have had to collect in each level was 100. The planned weapons were going to be the bubble gun, the pacifier gun, the false teeth gun, the flamethrower, the freezer, gnome gun, hairdryer gun, handheld missile, the pixel thrower, the rotten egg launcher, the shrink ray, and the tadpole gun. The handheld missile and rotten egg launcher made it into the final game. But in the beta, the pacifier gun, the flamethrower, the false teeth gun, and a golden fish gun were in these versions of the game, as well as this mysterious weapon right here. And here's a few other screenshots showing weapons that are unidentifiable. The flamethrower and bubble gun are still in the final game, but only via a debug menu. When used, they still use the plasma blaster as their model. The game seems to be running at 20 to 30 frames per second according to screenshots. The footage shows that the levels were meant to be split up into sections according to this text. The model was much more slim and smaller than the one in the final game. Originally, shooting cows would have gave Jim an extra life. In the final game, there are tiny hearts that serve as the game's extra life pickups. The fart mechanic was present in this version of the game. The death animation looks identical from the one in the final game, except it's missing the background. Jim's head for the HUD was 3D animated and would have blinked. And it looks like that the game used voice lines from Earthworm Jim 1 and Clayfire 64 as seen in footage. The game was not only meant to be on PC and Nintendo 64, but also the Sony PlayStation. The game was announced for the release of Nintendo 64, Sony PlayStation, and PC. This version was shown off at E3 1998 with tons of positive press coverage and had a release date of September 1998, before being delayed again, with some gamers starting to believe that it was vaporware. But due to various development cycle issues and the frame rate and animation having their own various issues, it led to the PlayStation version of the game being cancelled, and Viz Interactive to focus on the Nintendo 64 version of the game. Since the Nintendo 64 was not strong enough to handle all the original game's content, they ended up having to remove a large majority of the game's content that was already made. Similar to the final game, but with a few small differences, like Jim still using his model from the 1988 version of the game before they made it much more bigger for the final release. The icon being different, and it would have been animated with Jim blinking and reacting to various actions like shooting or taking damage. There's also this early version of the final game's HUD, but it was not drawn like it is in the final game. The game having a different menu. The strange weapon and the flamethrower are still being present in this version of the game, the flamethrower even having a model. The game always displayed how many marbles you needed to collect. The death animation still has a black background, and according to footage of the game at E3 1988, the original roles of the game were going to be fear, aggression, happiness, and childhood memories. It's unknown if these were early names for the stages or if they're meant to be completely different stages. A potential prototype cartridge does exist and is in the hands of Nesworld, a website that is used to document Nintendo 64 prototypes, and they also have images of the cartridge and footage as well. But the forum's website and Discord page is no longer active. A screenshot from an eBay auction of an Interplay press kit shows that the game gotten far enough in development to have a UPC code and an ISBN code. Now it's time for the rumors. It's unknown where this rumor originated, but there is a rumor that the 1998 version of the game, Evil Jim, a villain from the 1985 Earthworm Jim cartoon series, could have been the final boss for the game, but it's unknown if it's true. There's a small rumor and theory that the game could have had a port for the Game Boy Color due to several German advertisements and posters of the game marketing not only the PlayStation version, but also a Game Boy Color version as well. Strangely, there's some small evidence that suggests that Earthworm Jim, Menace to the Galaxy, was going to be the port of the game and not a separate game. That being that the game was also released and made around the same time as Earthworm Jim 3D. The game is also a collectathon, and several of its levels, like the laboratory, a house level, and a graveyard, were identical to levels that were seen in early versions of Earthworm Jim 3D that never made it into the final game, but it's unknown if this rumor is true or not. It's unknown where this rumor came from, but according to a rumor, it states that the final boss of the game, Earthworm Jim, was meant to be a love interest for Earthworm Jim before being changed into his feminine side, but it's unknown if it's true or not. But strangely enough, a potential theory led by TeddyRoo12 discovered some unused code that suggests that Earthworm Jim could have possibly been Jim's own mother. I'm gonna link the theory in the description if you're curious about it. So yeah, that's basically it for Earthworm Jim 3D cut content, and I want to say a few things before I end this video. First off, I'm not really going to be doing that much uploads because I can't really find a place right now to record audio. And as of right now, there's been an ongoing search for the prototype builds of Earthworm Jim 3D that has started. As of editing this video, a website page has not been made yet, but once it's officially made, I will link it in the description of this video. So, any people online, any lost media people, any lost media YouTubers, or anyone on the internet, please help us with this hunt and help us find and track down the prototype versions of Earthworm Jim 3D.
Damn these rich people.